Money is just really another relationship that we're having, and it reflects the relationship that we're having with ourselves.
This is Monterastelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 285, originally aired September 13th, 2017. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we have a conversation about people who are caregivers, be it professional or just because of our disposition, how they struggle with self-care, and how they struggle with money and how those two things interact. And as you hear in this interview, there is a bit of a twist, something I didn't expect to happen, but we will get to that in just a moment. Before we get to that, just a couple of announcements. First of all, if you have not checked out our archive, right now there are 347 audios over there waiting for you, not including this one today. This is 348th, which means that there's over 150 hours of free content waiting for you. Interviews with amazing people. We cover almost every topic under the sun, tapping audio after tapping audio. All of them are absolutely free of charge. All you need to do is go to tappingqandapodcast.com and you can have access to all of those things. There's instructions on how you can download the free app so that you can have access to that amazing audio library wherever you go. The second thing is there is still a small deal going on. I mentioned it last week. I think there are 3 sessions left. If you're interested in possibly working with me one-on-one in a short-term way, go to tappingqanda.com/world. All of the details are there for that. And finally, next week, we're going to have a conversation with Brad Yates about money and limiting beliefs. For today's conversation, I have a conversation with my friend Melissa Lester Olson. Melissa and my friend Jen are hosting an amazing live event that is happening this November in Orlando, Florida, called Improve Your Relationship with Money. I'm actually going to be one of the featured speakers at that event. If you'd like information about that and the ability to receive a discount for going to that event, go to tappingqanda.com/money. Like I said, it is in November. It is in Orlando, which will be a nice place to be. You should come down and join us. It's going to be 2 transformational days. And so as preparation for that, I was asking Melissa what she wanted to have a conversation about to just share with you in a similar topic for those of you who are not going to be able to join us. And she said that she wanted to have a conversation about the way health care providers, transformational healers, and people who just have this natural disposition to help others, how oftentimes they struggle with the ability to take care of themselves. And if you have been in self-care for any amount of time or self-help for any amount of time, this is not a surprising concept to you. You know lots of people in your life who do really good things to take care of others, who are notoriously bad at not taking care of themselves. And you might even recognize that in your own life. The thing that I found fascinating in just the pre-interview and the conversation leading up to it was this idea that not only does that show up in the way that we care for ourselves, but it specifically shows up in the way that we deal with money. And so as this conversation unfolded, there is this particular point where Melissa talks about money and our relationship to it, and it really stunned me. It caught me off guard so much that I kind of sat here in my office. I was doing the recording from where I'm doing this right now, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the next question was, and kind of hemmed and hawed for a few minutes. Fortunately, because I've edited the interview, you don't have to sit through all of that, but you can hear my bemusement and wonder to that. And the concept that she shares about our relationship to money and how that reflects our relationship with ourselves is a really new, interesting thought for me. And I have been thinking about it since we did the interview, and I have a feeling that I will be thinking about it for a really long time. So here is my conversation with Melissa about self-care, about money, and what that says about us. why is it that you have a particular interest or a particular concern when it comes to anybody in any of the healing fields, practitioners, professional therapists, and them taking care of themselves? Why is that something that is at the front of your mind and something that you think needs attention drawn to it?
This is such a great question, Gene. I think we all know a healer or a caretaker, or just a professional whose job it is to help other people, whatever that looks like for them, who has a bit of a blind spot about taking care of themselves, either in one sphere of their life or many spheres of their life. I think those of us who value the well-being and caretaking of others often use most of our energy extending ourselves toward other people, and we forget that we need to be nurturing and caretaking ourselves just as well.
And do you think that there is, and this would just be a guess or a hypothesis on your part, is there something particular about people who provide care for others that cause them to fall into this trap, or is this something that is just prevalent and it's something that you're particularly passionate about because you like caretakers and healers?
Well, as a therapist, I certainly get to see that this is one thing that healers and caretakers really have in common with, in other words, you don't have to be a healer or a caretaker for this to be a blind spot. But I think we all share some common values. I think that we have compassion for our fellow human beings. I think that we get a great deal of reward and nourishment from helping others. And so I think it becomes an issue of balance. And I think it's really easy to get out of balance when what we do for work is the caretaking of other people. A lot of times that leaves us depleted. And so the blind spot that we have about self-care can turn into all kinds of areas of our lives that are not being nourished and cultivated.
So when we see people who are caretakers and they have this problem where they're not doing a very good job of taking care of themselves, and I agree with you, because there are loads of people in my life who are in healing work that are making the exact same problem. From your point of view, is this something that it's just I've been giving all day and at the end of the day I'm exhausted and therefore I don't have the energy to take care of myself? Or is there something dispositional or experiential or something about people who are drawn to the healing arts that also leaves them in a place where they're notoriously bad at putting themselves last?
I think yes, and yes to everything you've said. I think for sure, you're depleted after giving all of your best energy away to the care of others. But I think you're right that there is something that self-selects for people in the helping professions. I think a lot of times as kids, we were given the message that other people's well-being was more important than our own. I think that can become deeply compelling for us as adults. That also can translate into difficulty receiving if we didn't get the message that we were deserving or entitled to be receiving in an equal kind of a way. So I think all of these things are about a big imbalance. And a lot of the work that we do in therapy and a lot of the work that we do in EFT, tapping, one of the powerful things about tapping is that it helps us get right back to that childhood root of where our perceptions of the world come from. So yeah, I think you're right on all those counts.
And so this idea that we are taught very, very early that we put that other people are important and we need to be putting them first. In the work that you've done with your clients and having conversations with other therapists in your community, is that an initial sensitizing event, or is it something that it's kind of in the air as someone is growing up?
Oh, I think at its most compelling, these are expressed and also not quite expressed messages that we get as kids, that it's our job to sort of fit in with whatever is going on around us, that whoever our caretakers are may not have the bandwidth or the capacity to tend to our needs. And I think we internalize that experience, and we grow up and we project it out into the world.
And so I guess it's like all things. There's two sides to the coin in the experience. If we're in a situation where we're taught very, very young, for whatever reason, that caring for others is an important thing, that's a good in the world. That means that we have a lot of really awesome, amazing, transformational folks running around there. And at the exact same time, like you said, if there's not the sense of balance, then it can wreak havoc on the person who is doing that. What do you see are the consequences for someone who is out of balance in that way, that all of their energy is being pointed outwards and they're either not taking care of themselves or not allowing others to offer care for them?
One of the things that feels really important to say here is that as kids, we are soaking up all of these messages, whether they're explicit or implicit. And when we can't quite figure everything out because it's not being explained to us, we tend to fill in the blanks with stories that we make up because we work really hard as kids to try to make sense of what's going on around us. And so these stories become our truth. And as we work with people to resolve these truths that are really getting in the way for them, our work is really to go back to the initial wounding or trauma. And when I say trauma, that can be a small trauma, a medium trauma, a big trauma, and to help them make the connection between the source and their current struggle. The beautiful thing about tapping is that, of course, we can use thoughts, feelings, and the physical somatic sensations in the body. All of those things can be used as an entry point to do the healing work and to move the energy that's associated with those initial woundings.
And something that's really interesting that might be a little bit of a tangent before we loop back to what we were just talking about is this idea that you just shared there around this, that when we are young, we are writing stories, whether or not those stories are true. We're taking the experience that we have, the data that's coming in, and we create some story to make the world manageable and understandable. And I could see, it being very easy to feel like this conversation about these things that happen in childhood, that we're putting blame on caretakers, or where we're in a situation where, and I've certainly seen this with my own clients, where they're afraid to dive in and deal with those things because they don't want to be in a situation where they're blaming the people around them, where the people around them might not have actually done anything wrong. It was simply the interpretation and the experience of a child who doesn't understand the world, who sees the world through this imagination, is writing stories that aren't necessarily useful or true. They're just writing the stories that seem to be true based on the experience they have in that particular moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really keen observation. So the first thing I would say is that I am always being really clear with people that the work we're doing is not about blame and it's not about judgment, but it is about helping somebody come to a deeper understanding of where the origins of their story might be. And you're right. That's why I use the word story, and I noticed you use the word story, because the story and experience, they intermingle, they become one and the same.
Yeah.
They become truth. And so that's what's important is the combination of those two things and the meaning that the experience has for any individual. So it's certainly not about, if anything, it's about holding everybody who was part of that story with as much compassion as possible. And to the extent that we can offer the person we're working with compassion and help them learn to cultivate compassion for themselves, they then become more able to view the other people who are part of their story with compassion as well.
So in doing this, let's say I am a practitioner doing work along the way. I have this disposition. What are some of the symptoms that I need to be looking out for to recognize the fact that maybe I'm not quite as balanced as I would like in the amount of care that I'm giving out versus the amount of care I'm giving to myself?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that if you're a therapist or a provider of some sort who isn't doing their own work or who hasn't already done a tremendous amount of their own work, I think it's good to start asking yourself a lot of questions, because I do have a bias that we really do have to do our own work, not just for the sake of having it, quote unquote, done, but to have worked through our own process so that we can relate and have compassion for the client as they are working through their own process, so that it becomes us instead of us and them, so that we're always an us in the room together. One of the things that I think we have to keep our eye on is, what is our reaction? Are we having reaction to emotional reaction? Are we having judgment going on? Are we making enough room for the client? Are we starting to exhibit our own agenda for the client rather than giving the client as much room as they need to move around and determine their own agenda?
And so that sort of self-evaluation is really, really hard. I know this from my own client work and just kind of managing what's going on inside of my own head. We are notoriously bad eyewitnesses of our own experience, just because we're so sunk into the middle of it and we have the confirmation biases about how we see the world. How do you recommend someone practically does that? Like, other than asking the question, boy, I need to be doing things that are good and helpful and making sure that my agenda isn't showing up. What does that practically look like other than having that thought in their head?
Okay. My first reaction is therapy, and therapy. I think a grounding practice of some sort so that you're in your body. Grounding can be meditation. There are certain grounding exercises that you can practice outside of a meditation practice. Certainly guided imagery, muscle relaxation, all these kinds of things that can make sure we're actually in our body and present for the client, as opposed to up in our head.
And I think what's really important in that answer that you just gave, and I say important because I agree with you, because one of the next questions I was going to ask you, what is your definition of doing your own work? Because a lot of people who do this sort of work say, oh yes, I do my own work. I take some time every single morning and I tap for myself. And I love the fact that you've called out that we should be working with someone ourselves if we're going to be doing this sort of work. Every healer, every coach that I've ever hired to work with me, every therapist, one of the questions I ask when I'm interviewing them before I decide to work with them is I ask them about the work that they are receiving as well. Because if we're not willing to be doing that, it's going to be hard for us to be present.
Yeah, no, I could not agree with you more strongly. So to the extent that I have a little soapbox that I like to get on, that's it right there.
And so let's pretend that someone is hearing this and a little light bulb's going off over their head that, oh my gosh, maybe I should be doing this. Doing my own work, is that weekly? Is that monthly? What do you think that looks like for most folks? Or is that something that they just need to find a trained professional and have a conversation to kind of map that out for themselves? Yeah,
I think that the latter is really ideal, because what we're talking about is that when you are the tree, it's hard to see the tree, right? And so I think getting feedback from a professional based on where you're at in your life, where you've been, what you're struggling with in the present, I think that's going to be the most helpful. Some people are going to be looking at a lot more work than other people, but I think everybody can benefit from having the experience of what it's like to do your own work. And we all have work to do.
And I want to loop back to something you said a little earlier as we kind of look at doing that work for ourselves. And I guess this isn't something that I've thought about consciously before. Going into a conversation around making sure that we are caregivers taking care of ourselves and how it's really easy for us to run ourselves down and do that sort of stuff. One thing I hadn't thought about is we are less effective in the work that we do if we are not doing a good job of taking care of ourselves. I think oftentimes people think, well, I am giving too much, but really I'm the only one that's hurting from this. But if we're not at our best, that we're not present for our clients. What does it look like when someone is not taking care of themselves in the context of doing the healing work that they do?
Oh gosh, that can look like a lot of different things. One of my core values is being genuine and being present. And so it would be really, although I certainly have challenges in the self-care area myself, it would be hard for me to be talking to a client about their work if I was not addressing my own work. That doesn't mean that as a therapist or a coach or somebody in the healing profession that you've got it all figured out. That doesn't mean that you've solved all your problems and you've checked that box, but it means that you're present. It means that you're genuine. And sometimes occasionally it means you bring your own struggle into the room in appropriate ways so that you can be genuine with the client. So that if something's happening in the room and you're struggling with it, you feel grounded enough in yourself to be able to say, here's what I'm struggling with. And I think that can be hard to do if you're not grounded in yourself, if you're not doing your own work, if you are just not being genuine.
And so in addition to that sense of being genuine and present, it sounded like in the beginning of the answer, and correct me if I'm wrong, I heard you saying something, along the lines of, it's hard for us to expect our clients to be accountable and present to address their stuff if we aren't willing to do the same.
Exactly.
There's this where it impacts the work that we do. What does it look like outside of the setting that we're doing when we are not taking care of ourselves? When we're off the clock, when we're away from the work that we do, what are the common symptoms, outcomes of being in this situation?
Oh, I think not being connected to ourselves can lead to all kinds of behaviors that everybody uses now and then to check out. I think if you're not able to connect, you can't connect with yourself. You can't also connect with the people around you in your life. And then you're sort of in danger of using all kinds of disordered behaviors like drinking. Oh gosh, there's so many ways that people check out, right? Sitting in front of the television for long periods of time. A lot of people check out that way. But I think for me, it boils down to being present, and that has to be intentional. It doesn't just happen by itself.
To let the listeners in behind the curtain, before we do an interview like this, I always like to have a little conversation with my guests to see what's going on. And one of the things that really struck me as we were chatting before I hit the record button, as we were talking about caregivers not taking care of themselves, the consequences, the outcomes of that you had some particular insight that I hadn't really thought of before, that when a caregiver is giving too much, they're not taking care of themselves, they're not doing their own work beyond the normal self-medicating behaviors like the ones that you just listed, that there is a place where this also shows up with a very particular relationship to money and the way that we deal with money, the way that we ask for money, the way that we spend our money. Talk to me a little bit about that, because when you were talking about it earlier, it made a great deal of sense, but I want to hear it in your words again. Kind of what does that mean, or what have you seen?
Mm-hmm. Well, money really is an object. The way we have a relationship with all other objects in the world, whether it's ourself or the people in our lives or our work. Money is just really another relationship that we're having, and it reflects the relationship that we're having with ourselves. So, for example, here's a really simple example. If we have poor boundaries, if it's really hard for us to draw a healthy line in our relationships with people, then you're probably going to see that it's also hard to draw a healthy line with money. So if you're a people pleaser, if you're somebody who's really accustomed to putting your own needs last, then you might find that you don't have a lot of financial security. You might find that you get uncomfortable when you become aware of other people's needs, and it might even be hard for you to hold on to your own money. That's just one example. Then, there's the opposite. If you've had an experience of feeling denied or deprived, and you've had the opposite reaction, then you might see people hoarding money. You might see people being out of balance in that opposite direction.
One of the sentences that you said at the beginning of that is something that I'm going to be laying awake at night for the next 3 or 4 weeks thinking about. Our relationship to money is another relationship, and it's a relationship with ourselves. That is awesome. I've never thought about it in those particular terms.
It's funny. I think that's really an object relations kind of perspective, but it's a very simple one, and it's very true that if you watch people, their relationships with people and things all tend to reflect their relationship with themselves. So to me, the money piece is a sort of a natural extension of that.
And what I like about that so much is oftentimes when we are dealing with money, it's such a complicated thing because it is this tool that we need in the world, but it's also something that because of culturally the way that we live, we can apply value of ourselves, value of our work, value of our existence, and all of those things tied up inside of it. And it's so easy to think about it as this external thing, my money story, the way I deal with this stuff, the way I value my work. And I find that such a useful and helpful lens instead of trying to figure out what my relationship is with money and my history with money. And those are good things. And I love tapping on those as well. But using that as a question to say, okay, great. What is this telling me about me and how I have a relationship with myself? I can see that as just being... Because the nice thing about that is I think it does two things. One is it separates us from having really difficult questions about money, because money is a hard thing for us to talk about. It just culturally the way that it stands. And so it can be hard as an entry point for us to do work. And it gives us a chance, looking at it through that lens that you just presented, is it gives us the opportunity to go, okay, this is just a lens that I'm looking through to understand myself. And I have found that when push comes to shove, people are able to have a more honest conversation about who they are and how they exist in the world than they are about this scary money thing. And so it gives us another entry point. And when we do that work, I'm guessing that the consequence is our relationship with money transforms as well as we heal those things that show up when we use that as a lens.
Yes, that's exactly my experience. That's absolutely right. That when you do the work of self with a capital S, transforming your relationship with self does translate and extend into your relationship with the world and everything and everyone in the world. Yeah. Because it's not about the money, right? Because it's about everything else.
I mean, what you said is obvious, and I agree with it all 100%. And it's like, well, duh, of course. But the way that you just shared that so clearly and succinctly is really powerful.
Well, I have to tell you that one of the things that you just said that struck me, Jean, is and this was really a little bit outside of my own view, you're right about the taboo nature of talking about money. Clients and people in the world will tell you all of the most intimate details about their sex lives before they will talk about money. Mm-hmm. And I think in part that is because we live in a culture that is trying to sell this notion that your value, your worth as a human being is somehow correlated with your dollars. And so I think there's a lot of shame for people, especially people who struggle with money. I think there's a lot of shame around money. And I think that sort of, that makes it a taboo subject. So I think that was actually a very keen observation.
Is there, sometimes that we are in a situation where we are able to draw a one-to-one connection, when someone is acting in a particular way. I'm sure you do this with your clients. I certainly do it with mine. When a client starts telling me a story about what is going on in their life, I will start formulating some ideas in my head about what the possible underlying causes are to the story that they're telling me. And I'm not assuming that I know the answer, but after they tell me the story, after they share data, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some really specific questions to see if we can uncover that stuff. And I think as practitioners, because of the reason why people come to us is we have that experience, we have that genius to be able to find root causes very, very quickly. So the question I'm asking is, there are different types of things that we can have problems with money. We can have a hard time accepting it. We can have a hard time keeping a hold of it. Like it just passes through our hands like where our hands are sieves. We can be in a situation where we think about it all of the time. So with those sorts of relationships with money, what are the types of stories that we are telling where we're reflecting the truth about our relationship with ourselves through those particular types of stories?
You use the word sieve, and that's actually the second time in 2 days that I've heard the word sieve associated with money. Uh-huh. So people that don't hold on to their money enough so that they have financial security and stability may be coming from a number of different perspectives. They may have bought into the notion that life has to be a struggle. They may have been surrounded by people growing up who struggle. And so they may be recreating a struggle for themselves. Well, I think a lot of fears bubble up around this kind of an issue because there's the fear of who am I to relax around money? Who am I not to struggle? Who am I to have a comfortable life when everybody I love is struggling? So that's a common theme that I come across. The other thing that bubbles up pretty frequently is how is this going to affect my relationships? If I'm the one who's comfortable, maybe I lose my tribe. Maybe they reject me. Maybe they think I'm better than they are. Maybe I lose my place in the tribe. So this idea of, am I entitled? Am I deserving? How is this going to change my life? Another thing that occurs to me is this not wanting to be like somebody that we were exposed to, either as a kid or young adult, or so there's this notion of identifying myself in opposition to ... So that if you saw somebody who, for example, thought that money, if only they had more money, and that was the source of their deep unhappiness, you might have recognized that, well, something's wrong with that. Something's not quite right. So then you might reject money because you don't want to be buying into that same trap that you saw playing out around you. Then there are people who are all about the money. And so you might have a negative reaction to that and choose to distance yourself from money, period. So you can start to see that all of these things are really about imbalance. And what we're after always, whether we're talking about money or anything else, is really balance.
Excellent. Well, Melissa, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jane.
So there you go. That was thoughtful. The idea about our relationship to money as a reflection of our relationship with ourselves, that is something I'm going to have to sit with for a little bit more. I know it is going to start impacting the way that I work with my clients, and I have a feeling, funny enough, that it's going to impact the way that I continue to do my own personal transformation and development work. If you would like more information about Melissa, all you need to do is go to tappingqandapodcast.com, click on the link for episode 285. If you were listening to this in a smartphone or a tablet, all you need to do is go into the show notes, and there is a link right in there for all of Melissa's information. Right after we did this interview, Melissa sent me an email, and she wanted me to pass something along to you. There was a slight miscommunication when we were setting the interview up. Since the interview was happening over Skype, she thought it was going to be a video interview, and she wanted me to let you know that her hair and makeup looked spot on, and it certainly did. If you would like to join Melissa, myself, and a number of other really awesome speakers talking about our relationship with money and how it impacts the choices we make, how it impacts the way we thrive in this world, please come in November. Join us in Orlando. For information and registration for the event, all you need to do is go to tappingqanda.com/money. That link as well is in the show notes. Please check out our entire archive, tappingqandapodcast.com. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a topic you'd like to see us cover in the future, I would love to hear from you. You can email me directly, Gene, Gene, at tappingqanda.com. If you are listening to this in the Tapping Q&A app, just click on the contact button right inside the app, and you can leave me a voicemail or send me an email. If you are on the website, just click on the contact link up above. You can send me an email, or you can even leave me a voice message from right inside the website. I love hearing from you. It helps us to create better content for you moving forward. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Monterastelli. I hope you have an awesome day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Monterastelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Monterastelli or Tapping Q&A.